the UK were quite laggard in this space, but now there is the emphasis to position the UK and they put it here as not as an AI maker, but not an AI taker. Who has access to this data? Who has access to the high value data sets? Do they stagger that? Do they phase it? Do they have controls in place to only give data to certain groups? Let's say you're from academia, for instance.
The main message is that by 2030, 41% of large companies expect to reduce employees due to advancements in AI. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Project Flux podcast. We're back to discuss some of the big news that has been released this week in the world of AI for project delivery. But before we go into that, I just want to say a big shout out to our sponsor as usual, to Construct AI. They've just released some new features, so do go and check them out. Very proud to be sponsored by Construct AI, so please, when you get the opportunity, do go and check their website. It's in the show notes. And another quick reminder that if you want to get much more in the world of AI and project delivery, do subscribe to our newsletter. So you can pause the podcast right now and go onto the show notes and you'll see a link there to our newsletter, Project Flux newsletter, and you'll get all this news delivered to you in a nice readable style once a week. So that's the kind of adverts out of the way. Before we go on to the big news of the week, just want to welcome our co-host as always, Yoshi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Some big news this week.
Absolutely massive, especially if you're on this side of the pond, but even for those in the US, I think some of the news, well, it's certainly got a reaction from those in Silicon Valley as well. So some really, really interesting things we want to cover this week, mainly the AI action plan, which we did raise about 6 months ago when Matt Clifford first got appointed. So it's great to see the results of that appointment, but we're also going to cover the CES show and what's happened there and some of the discoveries and some of the new products that are coming to market. And we're also going to have a look at the text to CAD feature that's starting to transform construction industry and how that actually works in practice, along with pointing you in the direction of how you can try some of these things. And then finally, we're going to look at the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, because there's some really, really interesting stats there. So a fun-packed episode, we hope. Next week, we'll be back with the interviews. But for this week, it's myself and Yoshi just discussing these big news stories. So let's start then, Yoshi, with the UK government and the AI action plan that was issued to great fanfare, actually. You know, it did go all over the news in the UK. It took over the Sunday programmes. It took over the newspapers. This is kind of front page news as a result of Matt Clifford's recommendations about how the Prime Minister and how the government can turn the UK into an AI powerhouse. So it's really, really, really refreshing. But we want to scrutinise this and also look at some of the challenges around it. So what's your first impressions, Yoshi?
First and foremost, the 50 recommended suggestions have pretty much all been accepted. So you can typically look at that in a positive way and a negative way. Positively, it means the government are open to progressing on all fronts so we can improve the capability of AI within the UK. But equally, you can say, this is just too ambitious and it's just saying yes at the forefront, and then it might later trickle down to a no. So I think those two ways that you can look at that. I mean, the most important thing for this AI opportunities action plan is that it exists to improve the economic capability and the technological capability of the country. It should improve the lives of those within it. And it should also ensure that AI is prevalent among the masses. Because it is right now, but there are barriers to entry and not everyone knows about it or understands what it can do. So with this in mind, the response from the government itself was, or the plan was kind of separated into three sections, right? So it's to achieve these, we need to invest in the foundations of AI. I mean, the UK itself was, pioneered DeepMind, which is now progressed onto Google. But in this plan, it echoes DeepMind and Synthesia and a few other UK-based companies quite a lot. And it says how we fell behind after releasing some of these, after developing a lot of these companies. It's also there to push hard on the cross economy of AI adoption. So how can we scale AI products, AI capability, both in private and public sector? And then the main thing is, which me and you have discussed, James, that the UK were quite laggard in this space, but now there is the emphasis to position the UK, and they put it here as not as an AI maker, but not an AI taker. So they want to pioneer these developments, and they've set out this strategy as to how to do that, and it's for us to now discuss.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for people to realise there's two documents. There's the recommendations, which was led by Matt Clifford, and then almost as important, because those are just a set of recommendations, is actually the government response paper, because that, as you say, Yoshi, that says yes, we're going to accept all these recommendations, but also gives you a bit more meat on the bones about how they're going to do it. So, do you just want to talk about the key kind of takeaways about what they're going to do?
Yeah, I think when we approached it, I think there was so much to cover. We tried to understand or focus on how we're going to portray this back to the listeners. So it was looking at kind of a high level approach in terms of where the government want to position themselves, all the way through to the more granular. How can we open up public libraries, data public libraries, and sweat some of these assets publicly? So the main thing is the AI sovereignty, and I found this quite an interesting term, and it focuses on the UK being a lot more autonomous and having more control over its AI capabilities with less reliance on foreign technologies. Now, this is a good thing because it shows that we are confident enough in being able to develop capability and improve AI adoption, and build companies like DeepMind again. But there is that concern that creating sovereignty kind of creates insular policies, right? So it can limit collaboration with global on the global stage. It also means that if you're going in the wrong direction and you aren't pushing hard enough, you then can't reach out and grow to that scale, because this is going to be a public sector initiative. So there's the AI sovereign unit, which is supposed to be public sector driven, but there's always this conflict that private sector assume that public sector is too slow. So how do you match that speed?
Yeah, and at the same time as saying that, our chancellor's been out in China and cozying up to the president there. So it's not as simple as just saying we're going to go it alone, because we need to work with these other countries. But I think that we definitely have given away some of our capabilities, as Dev Amesha talked about when he was on the show a few weeks ago, where he talks about us being really good at the research side of things, but not so good at the doings, and we want to make UK a powerhouse of the doing as well. So some of the things that they talk about is like these AI growth zones. Do you want to sort of just describe to the listeners what they mean by AI growth zones?
Yeah, so the AI growth zones is an example of how we're going to grow the AI infrastructure within the UK. And it's specializing or specifying where these zones of innovation are going to exist. And it's going to start within Culham, Oxfordshire at the moment. And it's to streamline things like planning approvals, so it can create hubs for AI innovations, allow startups to thrive, introduce new jobs in these areas, facilitate the development of data centers, which also come into planning, labs and other critical infrastructure. So you can think of it as a holistic approach, which is focused on a region, and it can be a way to pilot the development of some of these growth zones. Now, in terms of public concerns, okay, yes, there's environmental impact. How are you going to manage the space? How are you going to manage the energy consumption? When you build people's jobs into these areas, are they just projects? Are they short term? Are they temporary? So all of these concerns have been voiced. Additionally, when you have these growth zones, how do you ensure they scale effectively?
Yeah,
Because it has to be widespread after a
but
while.
they
It needs to be coming into play.
I think it's a good idea, and the government have got history of doing this in terms of these economic zones that they've used before to try and boost productivity. But the devil with all of this actually is in the detail. It's like it's all well and good saying these things, but they're doing it. And I like the way that on the kind of the news and the way they've communicated a lot of this AI plan is around the practicalities of it. So planning, speeding up the planning process, helping teachers, helping people become more productive. But at least the AI growth zones is a way to get there. They recognize that it's not, you can't just click your fingers or wave a magic wand and it all happens. So I think I understand that. And then they also talk about the AI Energy Council, because they realize that energy is important. And this is where it was quite interesting, because they don't mention this in the report, but then they do in the government response about accelerating the investment of things like renewable and innovative energy solutions, including small and modular reactors. So this is where the two reports need to be read in conjunction, right? Because the government response actually mentions small modular reactors, which isn't mentioned in the plan.
Yes, exactly. And just on that, so this is led by the energy secretaries, and Clara Higgins mentioned in regards to energy capacity is that AI is a energy intensive frontier, and we must build infrastructure that is not just capable but also sustainable. So when looking at small modular reactors, the reason why they're so effective, and this is where the government are pushing towards, is because they're energy dense effectively, and they can be small, they can be modularly built. So these are the benefits of having something like that. And because we want to proliferate computing power within AI, and run a lot of inference on these AI models, you have to be able to scale that quickly. So one of the industry concerns then is, how do you what's the resilience of the UK energy grid like? Can it adapt and meet
Mm-hmm.
these demands, and can it scale quickly? So that's one thing.
And
And
that's
then,
why we get to the detail really quickly, where I said, like, the devil's in the detail. And
yeah,
there's going to be a lot of this coming out over the course of the next year, because whilst we all can celebrate the fact that the government have done something, I'm really impressed with what Matt Clifford has done. The recommendations to me are all very, very sensible. The government have come out and said, yeah, we're going to do it. Now we need to, if we don't see some advancement towards enabling these things to happen, bearing in mind the economic situation in the UK, for those listening
mhm.
outside of the UK, summarise it's not great. We're going to have to be asking questions about this, because this isn't, like I said before, it's not going to happen by magic. It's going to need some investment. Where's the money coming from?
Exactly, because energy consumption is going to be completely huge. And even going back to the growth zones, right? This is where we'll expect kind of hotspots of electricity usage going through the roof. In terms of enabling AI compute as well, James, looking back at the infrastructure itself, Labour, when they came into power, shut down Exascale in Edinburgh, which was like an
That's right.
£800 million supercomputer, right? So there's also that where we want to also push on with building supercomputers, or at least leveraging them. But I guess the one way that the UK looks to do that is not just focus domestically, but look at that within an international stage, or at least across Europe. So I
Yeah.
think it was the Euro HPC, which is a supercomputer, which is pre-exascale. I think the idea is to reconnect with that, and then see how we can power compute. So it's not just, I know they say AI sovereignty. It isn't just going on your own. It's picking and choosing where you can go, so you can move faster across these different swim lanes.
Yeah. And just, we haven't got time to go through every single recommendation, but just to pick up some of the other ones and sort of jump in if there's anything you want to kind of touch on a bit more, Yoshi. They talk about scaling AI pilots. So that's like removing the barriers, um, giving people the chance to experiment, which I think is a good thing. Public sector efficiency. So this is like the UK version of what did Elon Musk call it in America? I can't remember the acronym that he used, but making the public sector more efficient. And what they're basically saying is AI is a way of improving efficiency and improving outcomes. And then I thought this was a really, really cool one, because they use this as a bit of a political exercise, AI driven road maintenance, because they know when they're talking to the UK sort of consumer or the UK public, the number one gripe that pretty much 100% of people will have will be the state of our roads. And so they've used that as a good example. Cameras equipped with AI will be able to inspect roads, detect potholes. So that was a little bit of interesting play there, and probably hopefully a relatively easy win, simply because it can't get any worse than it is at the moment. So they'll be able to point to statistics that say it's got so much better since they implemented these AI measures. They've got support for key groups, so they're focusing on teachers and business owners. Healthcare innovations, which we've talked about loads, the fact that the NHS is under a huge amount of pressure in the UK, and actually a lot of it is misdiagnosis of conditions. And then you've talked about the sovereignty, the data sovereignty. Um, they talk about building a foundation for the next $1 trillion AI company coming from the UK. And I think Keir Starmer said there's no reason why the UK can't have the next Meta or the next Google. I don't think I truly believe that. Do you?
No, I don't truly believe that. I mean, the biggest cause for concern is the shortage of talent, which I know they're trying to improve now, but so many people have moved to the US, have moved to China, have moved to other areas which are spearheading development. So we do have a slowed start. The bit that I just want to focus on, though, is the use case within public services. So one of the
Yeah,
goals
yeah, go for it.
of our lives for sure, but this plan has come across and I did mention an unapologetic pro innovation approach. So it means that they might have overlooked a lot of the the governance and the AI ethics associated with what they're doing, because when you implement it within public services, there's going to be a massive concern around data privacy. There's going to be a big or a huge effort in making sure the data pipelines are all there and they're rigorous and the structure and quality is there. But equally, what it might sound like to the public is that they are playing into the hands of big tech, right? And this
Yeah, yeah.
is this going to create a disparity in terms of the power that big tech have within the UK, and then taken away from households or public sectors, because they will be powering and servicing a lot of the AI that we have. So the idea, for instance, of building data centers is going to be run through these big tech companies.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think there's always trade-offs with these things. So, like I said, the devil's in the detail. And then the last one, and I raised the point before, where's the money coming from? And they say the money's coming from, and this is the bit that I think I'm okay with all of it, and I'm pretty optimistic about all of it until I get to this bit, which is the private tech firms committing 14 billion and 13,250 jobs following the AI action plan. Easy to write down, very, very difficult to make that actually happen. And given the state of the public finances currently, basically this is underpinning the entirety of the plan. So if that fails, it all fails.
Exactly. And because big tech are pumping money into this, they're going to want to say.
Yeah,
So this
of
is the other thing.
course. Yeah.
So, and that kind of lends into the potential concern over the national data library, right? So we all know data is king. We're running out of data. There's new data. Do we create synthetic data? There's public data. There's proprietary data. But the focus here is improving public data sets across healthcare, transportation, projects in general. But who has access to this data? Who has access to the high value data sets? Do they stagger that? Do they phase it? Do they have controls in place to only give data to certain groups? Let's say from academia, for instance. Chief Data Officer Lucy Hanley said that this library will be a treasure trove for innovation, ensuring that the UK remains at the forefront of data-driven AI research. So I'm in favour of it for sure. I think public data, I think the ability to be able to analyse this will draw a lot of capability, but there are always going to be concerns about who owns and processes and gets access to the data, or even over-regulation, even the other way, because they mentioned that the regulation should come from existing frameworks like the EU Act, for instance. But I
Yeah.
think now
Yeah.
with this plan, you have to look at this plan, and say, does it still align with the EU Act? Because this is quite, like I mentioned, pro-innovation in terms of its approach.
Well, that's an interesting point, because even though we're not, the UK is not in the EU, we do have to do business with the EU. Therefore, the EU Act applies to a lot of what we do. And like you say, a lot of this is going to be pushing the barriers, whereas the EU Act actually kind of puts barriers up. So that is going to be, I didn't think about that, but that's a really, really interesting point. It'd be good to get somebody on the show at some point and ask them that question. But look, overall, I think it's a great step. I think what Matt Clifford's done is excellent in terms of the recommendation. The government have come out with exactly what you'd expect them to come out with, which is, yes, we agree, and a relatively high level strategy for how they're going to do it. But the devil's in the detail, and we probably need to review this again in like maybe 6 months' time to see how they're doing. And it'll be good if we could get somebody on the podcast. So if anyone's listening and wants to come on who knows somebody in government who'd like to come and talk about this in about 6 months' time, then do let us know, because I think that's going to be the best way of testing this. But we also, as always, in the newsletter and in the show notes, we've got all the rabbit hole documents that you can get access to: the plan, the government response, FT's response, BBC coverage, etc., etc. Anything else you want to cover on that before we go to the next story?
No, I think it's a plan for plans, is what it is.
Exactly. Good way of describing it. Let's move on to the second one then, because we also had the CES show. So for those who don't know, what's the CES show?
So the CES show is a huge event where products from around the world across technology are showcased. This event recently in Las Vegas apparently hit pre-pandemic scale. 150,000 attendees, 4,500 exhibitors, 1,400 startups. But apparently the vibe within it wasn't as buzzy.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's because a lot of the developments on show weren't as groundbreaking. And even for us, James, being immersed in this environment and seeing new developments all the time, when you compare it to this, we're like, oh, we've already seen this, or we've seen something similar to this.
Yeah,
So I think that's there. But what I like about this story, leading on from the UK story, is this shows you the technology which is already existing. So it shows
Yeah,
you what can be built within the UK potentially, but or also what can be already be leveraged. And I think there was a wide diversity of what was on show, and we've just picked a few key developments of which Nvidia have come up as the most impressive.
yeah. Do you just want to give, I suppose, in the time we've got, just kind of the highlights of some of the um, some of the recommendations or some of the technology that was being shown off at the CES show?
Yeah, so the main one was Nvidia, like I mentioned. They had two main developments. One was a robotic framework to be able to build, deploy, simulate, and test robotics in the age that we are moving into of physical AI. But the main thing that I want to focus on here is NVIDIA's Project Digits. So this is a $3,000 supercomputer, 1,000 times more powerful than the average laptop, and it is built specially for building, fine tuning, running, and deploying AI large language models through the NVIDIA stack. So you can do it all through that, and it runs locally within your laptop as well in terms of development. So it's awesome.
It's that, to me, that was the big takeaway as well, because $3,000, that's cheaper than like a mid-range MacBook, right? So it's not a lot. And my understanding is it works in companion to your normal computer and just handles a lot of the processing power, right?
Yeah, it can do that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but this is quite interesting because Nvidia. What I find interesting about this is like chip manufacturers getting in on the hardware act, i.e. Nvidia, and then you get the hardware manufacturers like Apple getting in on the chip act. So they're all trying to steal each other's, part. And in theory, what they should do is concentrate on what they're good at and work
Yeah.
together.
But the good thing about NVIDIA, what they've done here is they just reaffirmed that we're moving into the world of physical AI and robots. And I think they're doing that extremely well. So, for instance, with that robotic framework, simulation or generational capability they now have, it creates these low fidelity designs of a simulated environment and turns it into a high fidelity. And then what you can
Yeah,
do is you can use computer vision within robotics to be able to understand and run kind of multiverses across different actions of a robot, and test
mm,
or simulate different actions, and then it can optimize and improve what's the best one. So it bodes well for reinforcement learning, and I think it just
yeah,
reaffirms that they are moving into physical AI and they're going to spearhead it.
yeah. And they're perfectly positioned for it, aren't they? And we're not talking about a 10 times increase. This is 1,000 times more powerful than the average laptop. So it's significant. And it's available soon, I think. It's sort of March or April, something like that. Yeah, awesome, awesome. And the other one that caught my eye, and we're not going to be able to go through everything, but tell us about the Omni wearable.
Yeah, so this is an $89 temple mounted orb, or you can wear it as a necklace, but I thought the temple was quite interesting. And just by it being on the temple, it tells you that there's some brain cognitive interface within it. I chose it. It looks like a bit like a Mento,
Yeah,
right? When you
okay.
look.
All right, interesting.
But the reason why it stood out for me is because it is another one of those personal messenger sort of devices where it can narrate the world around you. And similar tech already exists. I think there was one called Friend that we covered on Flux a few months ago.
The
But
rabbit, there was the rabbit a while ago, wasn't there?
yeah,
I
there
don't
was
know what's happened to
there
that.
was the Friend necklace, yeah. But with
Yeah,
this,
friend, that's right.
the data that you have is built on an open source platform, number one. Data can be saved locally so you can access it. Developers are already creating apps for this device with 250 apps already on their app store, which is quite interesting because it creates a new ecosystem of a different type of device. So I quite like to look into that. But then the one concern, and this is the same with all always on technologies, is that data, looking into your data and your personal data, things that you don't actually want to talk about or provide or store somewhere, can be a threat. So I think it's worth
So,
considering.
so does this record like you're out for dinner with a friend? It will just record everything, all the conversations you're having.
Yeah, well, the example they showed was there was I think there was a guy walking, and then someone said in a different language, "Oh, he's hot, he's good looking,"
Yeah,
and then it picked it up and it knew it was you. So that was a bit like I was like, how does it know it's you?
I'm not. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the concept video was quite typically showcasing a lifestyle almost rather than focusing on the pure technology. But it's interesting because of the shape and the connections and the capability it has on the software front as well.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of technology that feels quite scary because it's really intruding on your privacy. But there's enough firms out there trying to have a go at this that makes you believe that it's going to become
Yeah, and for me, just
relative.
quickly on this one, because I thought about my nan at this, and I thought, she's hard
Mm,
of hearing. So I thought if you've
yeah,
got this orb timbre on your head and you can hear someone speaking, it can detect something speaking about you and you can't. It can relay that information back to you. So I don't know how accurate that would be, but I quite like that use case for those who are hard of hearing as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as we always say with this technology, this AI technology, it can be used for good and for bad, right? So if someone wants to hack into every conversation that you've ever had, or if they want to use it for, as you say, helping people who are impaired in some way, and it's making sure that we get the best out of it rather than the bad. Is there anything else specifically you want to cover? I know you can't go through everything, and
Not more from me, or we can run through these. So there's a software called Runner-H. I picked this out because they are a software company which are claiming to be building super intelligence, but also that they run the fastest no-code AI agents today. And why I find that interesting is because when we were looking at Anthropic's computer use technology, so for the ability for the AI to be able to control your computer, this is reportedly 29% faster, and it also runs on its own but small, powerful LLM, showcasing what smaller models can do, of which this is in private beta testing at the moment, which means it is being tested by those who have access to it. So that's one that I would like to cover. The other one, which was I think the main appeal of CES 2025, even though it's only in concept, is a smart mirror. So this is an AI-powered smart mirror. It can analyze, display, and voice a comprehensive health assessment to you when you stand in front of it. It sounds very futuristic. And the bit that I like, what they touch on, is telehealth capability, James. And we've kind of touched on
mm-hmm.
this a few times about, if you can use generative AI or large language models to detect your health state and send it to a physician, you could potentially do that with the information you get back from this health assessment, and then potentially
Right, okay.
hold remote or virtual calls with physicians.
Yeah, I think anything like that can help sort of detect anything that's wrong before it happens is good. This is definitely an example of AI being used for good, right?
Exactly. And there's the last one I want to just cover is the Halliday AI glasses. And the
Go
reason
on.
I picked this one out of interest because again we've covered Meta's Ray-Ban smart glasses, but these are apparently slightly more expensive at $399 to $499. But they only weigh 35 grams. Apparently, they have proactive AI capabilities, so the ability to translate language in real time or conversations, voice to text interactions if you don't want to use your hands, 100 hours of standby battery life, or 12 hours actively. I think it's a competitor to Meta's Ray-Ban, but I know they also have their Orion glasses, which is yet to be showcased. The main thing to take away from CES is that all the big players kind of kept quiet. I mean, Microsoft Copilot was introduced into Samsung and LG TVs, but I think people were kind of fearful of what Nvidia were going to bring out, and I think they kept away.
Interesting, yeah. And those glasses, what are they powered by? I mean, I haven't heard of Halliday before. Have they got their own bespoke operating system within it, or are they powered by something else?
I am not sure on that, but I don't think they have
No.
their own. I think it will be leveraging a version like GPT-4, I assume.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. And the main message is that by 2030, 41% of large companies expect to reduce employees due to advancements in AIs. Does that surprise you?
No, not at
No.
all.
Yeah. So it's just more kind of ammunition about why it's so important to upskill yourself in AI. And to make sure that we realize, whilst we talked about the beginning of this podcast around the action plan that the UK has and many other countries have, there is consequences to that. And the consequences are that there are going to be changes to jobs and to workflows. So what's interesting, it says about 70% of companies plan to hire workers to develop AI tools. So it's not just a net loss. There'll some of these workers being changed to have new jobs developing AI tools, and 62% aim to recruit talent focused on collaborating with AI systems. So basically, the upshot is they're looking at finding ways of retooling, I suppose, the workforce.
Yeah, this to me wasn't surprising. I mean, I know that Satya mentioned it at Microsoft, and Mark Zuckerberg also mentioned that he's going to be replacing a lot of mid-level developers with AI. So, but when I say it doesn't surprise me that the jobs are going to go and it's going to be positioned with AI, replaced with AI, is not that I don't think humans can deliver a lot more value. And James, I've written a whole essay on this, and I think that humans
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of value, and I think there's a space where we can position ourselves in, and we'll touch more on that next week. I think it's the fact that companies just see the benefit of having AI that can work tirelessly and that can draw value and insight a lot quicker. I think that's the key thing. So this idea of moving humans to delivering a lot more higher value work. And when I mean higher value work, I mean work whereby we aren't just problem solvers, we become problem redefiners, right? I think that's the position where humans need to be in, and we need to be able to delineate what that looks like within our roles going forward. So even with the UK government saying they're going to introduce all these jobs, yes, they're going to change. So you have to adapt and understand what that high value now looks like.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that's what the point of these reports are. It's getting people to understand for them what it means for them. So that's why upskilling is essential, understanding what new roles could be and understanding how automation is going to change the workforce, and it will undoubtedly cause some redundancy. So in a sense, there wasn't anything massively surprising in this report. It was just another one to go with the stacks of reports we already have on this, which basically boils down to AI is coming, it's not going away, it's going to have a massive impact on how we develop.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think we'll probably leave it there. The only other thing to mention is a couple of big events coming up. So on Wednesday, the 15th of January, we have an event at Oracle's offices talking about how AI meets construction. And then the other big one, and this is a date for your diaries, is the 24th of February. We have an event at EY's offices in London, diving into their report about how artificial intelligence can unlock a new future for infrastructure. So we'll put the link again in the show notes, but do put that in your diary. It's going to be a fantastic event. We've got some great speakers lined up, including some of the fabulous guests that we've had on the podcast. So that's it for this week. Next week, we'll be back with some guests, and we've got guests lined up for quite a few weeks coming up after this. Is there anything else you want to bring up or discuss or close with, Yoshi?
No, I think it's just worth keeping track of what's going to happen within the next 6 months, both within public sector, private sector, and for governments.
Brilliant. Okay. All right, mate. Well, we'll see you all next week, and thank you everyone for tuning in to Project Flux for another week. Cheers. Bye.
Project Flux is here.
Just want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Construct AI. For anyone interested in looking at Construct AI, the link's in our show notes. There's a free tier that you can play around with. Yoshi and I have been using it for a good year since it was originally launched, and we get a huge amount of value out of it. So I thoroughly encourage everyone to go onto the Construct AI site and have a play around.
Cool. And guys, before we sign off, please don't forget to share, follow, and like all of our stuff. So that helps us to engage with you and understand a bit more about what you want so we can bring it to your doorstep as early as possible.
See you later, everyone.